Noelle Fitchett is a Christian cultural and political commentator originally from Los Angeles. She is a first-generation college grad and now a graduate student. Noelle lives by the motto, "Facts don't change minds, rather friendships do," and seeks to amplify this message in the delivery of her commentary. Noelle is the host of Out of Context, where she aims to reach Gen Z through uncommon conversations. During our interview, we discuss words as a form of co-creation, the limits of her bridge building, navigating her experience of getting doxed, and learning to be the bigger person while growing up in Gen Z. With Noelle, I'm Sienna Mae Heath, and this is Leaving the Left for Liberty. So Noelle, we were just talking about words as a form of co-creation and your faith and what motivates you to speak out and co-create relationships that you want to experience, and as I get the sense, like a world that you want to experience. But in your own words, what is motivating you to speak out as an individual?
I think one of the things that really motivates me to speak out is mainly my generation, seeing so many people forced into silence or forced into a type of social compliance. And I hope that when they see more people like them, that they'll be inspired to also speak out, because I think there's so many people, whether they're Gen Z, millennials, or older or younger, so many people want to be able to freely express their thoughts. But unfortunately, I feel like in so many different states, and even I think really online, it's so hard and scary to do that in fear of repercussions of job loss or even just losing friends, which is really difficult. Um, and so I think that's one of the main things that drives me, and my faith, of course, and my love for people. And I think that kind of all ties together.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm so excited that we're doing this too.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, your content has been grounding me in the wild world that we're in, and there's so much emotion that's fueling both sides, and I think to some degree it kind of makes sense. I mean, there's some really evil stuff out there, and I think it would be a little odd to not experience or express any emotion about it. And I really appreciate how you express yourself so fully, and you also like mentioned relationships, losing friends, gaining friends. Being in Gen Z, like what has it been like for you over the past few years in the 2020s, speaking out and also just living your life?
Honestly, it's been an adventure. I think that's the best way to define these past few years. I never considered going into politics or any sort of cultural environment, I guess, or commentary. And I was a little bit forced into that when I was doxxed. And so all of my personal information was placed online, cell phone number, home address. And I was living with my family at the time. So that kind of put them in a really difficult position as well. And so that experience really molded me into the person that I am now. Because I remember it happened to another girl who was living in the same city as me, and she was so afraid that she deleted all of her social media. She just completely hid from the world. And my heart breaks for her, because no one should ever have to feel like they have to hide from the world, especially in the modern society that we live in now. It was so heartbreaking to see. And so that's been difficult. I think things have calmed down a little bit more, but I've gained so many more friends than I have lost. But that really was a shifting point in my life.
Yeah, it's very chilling to experience any sort of doxing or intimidation. There's a force behind that, um, that is just so corrupted and at times misguided. And I know you have a way of expressing compassion in some cases for what we're grappling with. At the same time, as your friend experienced, like there's only so much one person can handle, and I think there's grace in acknowledging that. Like I know for me, sometimes I'm like just like wanting people to stand up, to stand up, to stand up, but even that, there's force behind that, right? Because it's like
Mhm.
you have to, or else, like, what, I don't know, the world will come to an end, which it probably will because we need a better one. um, so yeah, there's only so much one person can handle.
Mm.
What is it that you experienced when you were doxxed, and what was it that you learned about yourself in that time?
To be honest, I almost deleted everything. I was so close to hitting that button of just completely getting off the internet. And I remember it was a friend at that time who told me, Noelle, no one can hurt you unless you let them, verbally at least. And which has a lot of truth to it. And I think at that moment, it was a huge, in the moment when she said that, I was really upset because I just thought, you don't understand. I'm a human being. I can't handle all of these terrible things that these people are saying about me. Because so much of what they were saying wasn't true, or it was true. And it was things that I had healed from that I really didn't want the internet to know. So that experience, but I think that experience really pressed me into God and realizing that my identity is only in God, and God knows my heart and my intentions behind everything I say. So despite what people say, I know my intentions are good, and I know that the only person who matters knows my intentions. But that was a really challenging experience because it didn't just last one day, it lasted several months. I would receive phone calls from people saying really nasty things. So now I don't answer. I mean, it doesn't happen anymore, but I just conditioned myself not to answer my phone unless I have the phone number saved now, because I didn't want to change my phone number. So, but that was but I think that I'm a big believer in knowing that everything in life happens for a reason. And before then, in middle school, high school, I had experienced severe bullying. So I'd kind of gone through really deep moments of a lot of sorrow and anxiety. And I think that those moments prepared me for that doxing. So,
Yes, I hear you. I can relate, and I've heard so many fellow dissidents say similar things, that they had some sort of preparation process, whether it was bullying or other forms of abuse, having to manage conflict on a more micro level. There's like, and I think maybe for each of us, we see God playing a role. But even if, even if someone doesn't believe in a higher power, there's just something interesting about the preparation process, right? And like the
yeah.
gradual strengthening of the person and maybe the spirit. Let's back up a little bit. What exactly what did you say or do that caused people to dox you in the first place? And when was this exactly?
So it was in, I want to say it was actually on 4th of July of 2020. That's when everything had started. I was not at all political, did not voice my opinions online at all. And granted, so the time that I did voice my opinions, my grandma grew up in Texas when it was segregated. And so she's always had a more conservative leaning mentality. She's not really into politics, but in terms of personal responsibility, she's never really expressed any animosity for the country. So I really wanted to hear her perspective on why she felt that way, because I was leaning towards the other way. I was heading in a different direction. And hearing her experience of not being able to go into movie theaters, not being able to go into restaurants, and her still being so thankful. She grew up in poverty, but her still being thankful for her life and the blessings that came out of her life really pivoted my way of thinking. And so I made a video with her on TikTok and posted it. And then after that, because I haven't always, I used to be a lot worse with my choice of words. And so I went down this rabbit hole, realized that a lot of what I was believing, what I was lied to. And I was a philosophy major. So a lot of what I was being taught was a lot of lies. And so I was really angry, and I went online and I said, I'm really tired of so many lies being said. You can accomplish so much if you get off your butt and work hard. And I didn't use those words, I used harsher words. And that just a few people saw it. From I went to high school with them, they saw it, they posted on Twitter, and it just blew up on Twitter. And that moment also taught me to be more careful with how I express my thoughts. But I do believe that situation was used, and in a lot of good ways as well. I met a lot of friends who also ended up changing their minds too. But that video is kind of what sparked everything. And then after that, I decided I was either going to be silent or continue to speak out. And I kind of just through that experience from I would say I didn't speak out from 2020, from July of 2020 to about November. I wasn't really saying anything. I was kind of just regrouping, taking that time to learn, figure out what I really believed. And then in January of 2021, I actually started to write a little bit more and started to make friends and listen to some really amazing thinkers who I look up to. And then I started to actually vocalize my opinions more online and my thoughts.
Hmm. It's interesting that you were a philosophy major too. I feel like that's really not a surprise, like that you'd want to explore big ideas and um, gather unheard voices and uplift them like you did for your grandmother. Remind me, was this your grandmother on your mom's side or your dad's side?
On my dad's side, my mom's side is they're from Mexico. So my grandma on my mom's side is an immigrant, and my dad's side, they have a really long family, complicated family history, but it was my dad's side.
Oh, interesting. Okay. How do you think that being of mixed race plays a role in how your story has unfolded?
Um, I think it's allowed me to be a little bit more compassionate. And it because growing up, not really sure of what I was. A little bit of context. My last name is Fitchett, which is really rare and really strange. We didn't really know where it was from. I kind of knew that I was a mix of a few different things from my dad's side, and then growing up, I was able to look at some records, and I found out that his one of his great grandfathers was actually in the U.S. colored troops. So he fought on the side of the Union in the Civil War, which is really cool to find out, and just find out a lot of more history from his side. But growing up with the last name of Fitchett and living in a predominantly Mexican area, was not fluent in Spanish, had family members who looked different. It was a bit of an identity crisis for me. I didn't fit in with really any group wholly, I guess. It was always I was a part of certain groups, but I wasn't enough for that group, if that makes sense. And so that experience, I mean, I went to a private school for a year. I was told to comments because of the way I looked that school was predominantly white. But then I went to a predominantly Mexican school, and I was also told comments there because I wasn't fully Mexican. So that experience, I think, helped me develop a little bit more compassion, and kind of learn that to embrace the different parts of me, and not to see it as a negative thing. Because that was something that I definitely struggled with for a lot of my life. And had I not had that experience, I don't think I would be as compassionate about certain issues, if that makes sense.
It does. It sounds like it helped you lean into the complexities of the human experience as you leaned into your own complexities in that way and how people were regarding you. Um, and you mentioned, school and friendships, and I've noticed that your motto is that facts don't change minds, friendships do. Tell me more about that.
So, before in 2020 and early 2021, I was definitely more of the facts change minds. And I was, I mean, my friends say I wasn't a troll, but I feel like I would consider myself more in that space of just really harsh. And which is true. Facts are so important, and we should always have facts to support our claims. But I was missing that human element. I think I felt like I was finally out of a cave and I had learned new information that I was extremely I feel like I could have been a little bit more slower to speak. And so the reason why now I approach it as facts don't change minds, friendships do, is because in my philosophy classes, we had seminars and we had to engage in these discussions about critical theory, about gender theory. And I knew that if I came at them in an angle where you're wrong and this is the reason why, they were just going to shut me out. They weren't going to listen to me. Most of my friends were more left wing. And so I knew that I was going to lose my friends, but also I knew that they weren't going to listen, and they weren't going to listen to anyone who approached it from that angle. So it really started in my classes, and learning how to change minds through friendship. So becoming friends with someone, them understanding my intentions, and then seeing issues that they care about and presenting information to them in a way that showed them this issue you care about, the solution is actually different, but I would kind of reframe the solution, if that makes sense. So, for example, environmentalism. A lot of my friends were really big on environmentalism, and they believed that the solution to environmentalism was certain politicians that I did not believe were going to actually help the environment. So, I would bring up cases of countries that did that approach. And I guess coming from the approach, if I care about the same issue as you, I care about you as a human being, as my friend, we talk outside of class, this issue is can be approached this way. And I think that they were more receptive, and a lot of them changed their minds because we would get lunch together, we would have conversations. They knew I cared about them as a human being. I hope that makes sense. But
Yeah, you're making so much sense. And as you speak about these lunches, I'm just wondering, like, was this before 2020 or after?
so it was after 2020. And it wasn't until late 2021. I went to school in California, so we didn't go back until mid semester or about 3 weeks into 2021. So it was after everything, the fall of 2021, 3 weeks into the semester. So
Okay. Wow, that's really brave of you. Are there any topics where you kind of lean more towards facts and proclaiming truth?
yeah, absolutely. I think I try to do that with every conversation I have, but I think the conversation that I really try to always make sure that facts are at the forefront of the conversation. And this might be a sensitive issue. I know that this is a really sensitive issue, so I don't know who the audience is. So just a warning, is abortion. That's probably the issue that I always make sure I have science to back up. I was a double major, so I did biochemistry research as well. And that's I definitely try to bring out the science major when I'm talking about that issue because it is hard. It's a personal issue. I have several family members who have had abortions. So I want to make sure that I always approach that with compassion, but also I provide resources as well.
Yeah, that is probably the most touchy subject of our time. And um, I think a balance of compassion and logic is essential. Um, I acknowledge it's such a complicated issue, and like as a woman, I'm aware that we're dealing with some big systems, and like once you pull one thread, like who knows, who knows what that could have an effect on. Um, I maybe this is I don't know how relevant this is because I don't want to talk about abortion that much, but I formed a pro-choice stance that I think libertarians can get behind, and to some degree maybe pro-lifers sort of, um, is that I think that if each woman has the choice to have an abortion, then each individual and family should have the choice not to fund the abortion industry with their tax dollars.
Hmm. I so that was actually my stance for a few years. I don't think it was until 2022 that I had slightly changed my stance from that. And so I I also really like libertarianism, and I really like the idea of everyone being able to freely express themselves until it infringes on another human being's right.
There's the non-aggression principle in libertarianism, that basically says what you just said, that is like, okay, like you're free, and also like don't infringe on my space and my rights. Don't tread on me. Um, so it's complicated, and I think that that's one issue where many individuals in different ways, they really have their limits as to how far they'll go and what conversations they feel comfortable having and with whom. That's just the nature of like really touchy subjects. So I'm curious for you, like, are there any limits to your reach as you do this bridge building work?
I think one of the limits for me is I'll talk to pretty much anyone when it comes to any sort of dialogue. I'll have a conversation with anyone. I think for me, I set my boundaries on social media. I will not follow if so I try to be selective with the information that I take in and who I follow. But if I'm following someone, for example, recently I really enjoyed this person's thoughts. They were more libertarian minded. I really liked their content, but it felt like every other post was them attacking people of faith. And it got to a point where it was attacking the people rather than the argument of the faith, of the belief system. It was just constant attacks to the people. And I stayed following them for about a year and a half of them still posting that. But I just felt like I found myself getting angry or bitter towards that person. And I knew that it wasn't going to be good for my soul if I kept following them because I was just going to continue becoming bitter towards them. So I just decided to unfollow them. That's kind of my boundary in that. And I work with a few different organizations in that bridge building space. And I've shared that with them. I'm willing to talk to anyone. I'm willing to advocate for dialogue between various types of people. My limit is just when we start attacking the people rather than the argument. I feel like that's not productive for anyone.
Well, and when something is so near and dear to you, such as your faith, it kind of is a personal attack, like because it's you get to decide what your person is. That sounds so woke, but I think there's still like there's boundaries around that for me too. I mean, there's basic logic and reason to consider, but I think like whenever something is a big part of who you are and a big part of how you see the world and express yourself, then it does start to feel kind of personal. And maybe the other person isn't trying to make it personal, but like for you, you're just like, but this is so important to me. In your case, your faith is so important to you. Two things come to mind. One around experiencing respect in discourse and when it might be time to end or to take a break. And then the other is religious freedom. Hopefully we can remember both those things. So first tell me about like even if a specific example comes to mind of like experiencing discourse or observing discourse where you realize, okay, like there's disrespect about faith and perhaps about religious freedom in this conversation, and maybe it just can't really go any further. There needs to be a break or a breather for a while.
I think so. I haven't really had, honestly, I think for the most part, most people are respectful when it comes to faith. Okay, of course, I'll get a few hate comments of people saying, oh, well, this is just a fairy tale book. But I'm like, okay, well, if you don't want to have a conversation, then there's not really much I can respond to you about that. Let me know when you have questions. I think the most common is in the gender discussion when people just immediately start calling you a turf and just really start saying a lot of things. And it was really sad because I did experience a lot of hate when I started speaking out again. I don't want to say against, but against a lot of the stuff that Dylan Mulvaney was doing. And I received thousands of DMs from, honestly, it was a lot of middle schooler and high schoolers, which is a whole nother problem in itself. But I had a lot of conversations with them, and I think the point in which I stopped was when they just started saying things like, I hope you die, all of those really harsh things. I realized, okay, well, this is not a conversation at this point. This is just you letting out your emotions. So there's no point in me engaging in this type of conversation. If someone's not presenting me a claim that I can either refute or a question that I can respond to, um, then I don't really see a point in engaging with them. If they do, but then I keep responding the same thing and they just keep saying the same thing, I'm probably just going to stop responding to them because at that point I know that their ears are closed and they don't really actually want to have a conversation. But I think that's been my experience with those two things is they're not willing to and they display that in their behavior. I really won't continue engaging in that conversation.
Yeah, and to me it's almost not a conversation at all when the two people are just repeating themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, if it's a written conversation, like, you can just scroll up and read that again. Like, why are either of us engaging in this chat? Sometimes I'm left wondering myself. And the gender issue is another touchy subject. And I mean, I'm really baffled by some of the examples I've seen come out, even Catholic schools. I saw one example at a Catholic school up in Canada where a boy, I think he was in high school, a boy in a conversation about gender basically said, I believe there are only two genders, which I think is just a basic biological fact. Like, each person is male and female gametes. We're male and female. Even those who are born intersex, still male or female gametes. Anyway, that's the truth. And then also to be at a Catholic school and to be taken away by the authorities for saying that, for proclaiming like just a basic fact that's also aligned with, I thought, the school's principles. Turns out public schools, even or I guess maybe even like Catholic schools, are funded by the government in Canada. So there's a lot going on there. But yeah, what do you like? How are you navigating like your own experience of speaking out and just like watching like the vicious attacks unfold, just the nonsensical hard-headedness around this topic?
Honestly, um, sometimes I shut off my phone because it's just, I can't believe that this is the world that we live in sometimes, where objective truth is seen as hateful. That's just it blows my mind. I feel like I'm living in a dystopian book, like I'm living in a Brave New World or something like that, which is so sad because I love dystopians, but I don't want to live in a book that's a dystopian novel. And that's what it feels like sometimes. And I think it's really important that women especially speak up when it comes to a lot of these sensitive issues. That way, because I really do believe that majority of the population does agree with the common fact that there are two genders and that there should be boundaries. And I do think the majority of the population believes that, but people are just so scared to say it. And I think that if more of us speak up, more people will be willing to vocalize their opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I not that long ago, maybe like 5 years ago, I understood that there were only two genders. I also was of the mindset like, well, what's the harm? Like, what's the harm in just like affirming this nice person in front of me, this nice man who is going through what they call a transition and is presenting very much like a woman? What's the harm? I really like, I couldn't see it. And of course, I have concerns about children. I think when it's affecting both children and adults, and it's, forcing rapists into women's prisons and um, coercing speech, I really think that like, for me, that was the line. I really tolerated and was open to so much. But like the moment that like it was implied, like, you have to speak this way or else, I mean, there's so many threats that come with that, like literal like life and death kind of threats, or else like we can't be friends or we can't be family, or like very like bold bold statements are made. And I agree, it's like a dystopian nightmare. um I'm curious about your experience of like the contrast of real life and online life. Like we were chatting about how like during the pandemic people were online like wishing us dead for not getting vaccinated, or saying we really don't have compassion if you do die, which is really not that much different. um and just, I mean, in the intro video for the show we have lots of examples if anyone wants to go down memory lane. But like there was that happening, and then there was also there were like posts going around from LGBTQ activists saying you can't vote for someone who would hurt me and tell me you love me. And I would see that quite a bit as well. And I remember thinking like, I don't know if I'm very true to my word, and I like to be true to other people's words and respect them for it as much as I can.
Yeah.
So when I would see a post like that, I'd be like, okay, well, if you think my vote would hurt you, then I guess I can't tell you I love you. Like
Mm.
I'm honestly, like I was honestly just like trying to rationalize it and be like, okay, all right, so I guess no Christmas card this year. Like
Mm.
it's weird, right? Like I
Mhm.
mean, that baffles me, because you know, if there was the clarity and the consistency of like, okay, people are like that online and they're like that in person, like every individual was just consistent about their online life and their real life, and their persona was just who they are, I think I would be like more settled. I'd be like, all right, so you're just kind of a jerk. Got it. But
Yeah.
there are these like really like shy people in person who said like the weirdest, most bizarre stuff online.
Mhm.
And I still am just like a little bit rattled. I'm just like, I don't know who people are anymore. Like for me, because people will tell me like, okay, but that's just online. And I'm like, yeah, but they've pretty much revealed some of their deepest inner thoughts. So I don't know that I can unsee that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I feel like so many people would just say things that they thought, and then they're not actually things that they put into practice. It's much like performative activism, where people kind of just say things to virtue signal and then they're not actually living out those values. My family posted things like that. So I'm talking about it because I've talked to them now about it, and I mean everything's kind of out in the open now. But I had family members who said, you know, if you didn't get vaccinated, don't come near my kids. And I have two younger cousins who are autistic, and so they can't. I understand the fear in my aunt's mind if they can't vocalize, if they don't feel well, they're nonverbal. One of them is nonverbal, but that was so hurtful to me as someone who was, I was buying them things that would help with their autism, and I was always visiting. So I could not make sense of her statements that she was saying online about voters, about people who didn't get vaccinated, about people who believed that in certain immigration policies. But then I would go to her house the next day and she was so nice to me. And so that was so difficult, so difficult. And one of the years, I think it was 2021. I think it was 2021. It was 2021. So Christmas Eve is celebrated. We celebrate it Christmas Eve in the night. It's just we all get together on my Mexican side. It's we all have soup and it's a big thing. And I decided not to go. My whole family went, and I was the only one who didn't go because I was traveling for work at the time. And I knew that what they said they didn't want to be around people who weren't vaccinated. And so I thought, you know, if I'm traveling, I could probably be sick. I just got off a plane. So I'm not going to go because I don't want to engage in that conversation. God forbid I get someone sick. And at the time, my cousin who went was she was claiming to not be, she did get vaccinated, but she was out partying, socializing, going on vacations. So I was angry because I saw my family saying these things about people who went outside, indirectly posting about me. But then I had family members who were over there who were out clubbing and doing all kinds of stuff, but were still at the dinner. But I think that God and life has a sweet sense of vindication, because later on they found out the truth of all of that. They found out how that impacted me, and I shared with them how I was doxxed. And so there was reconciliation. I'm very thankful. That didn't happen until very recently. But it's hard, especially when it's our family members and our friends. I lost most of my friends during 2020 because of the things that they were saying. But I do want to acknowledge, I think that I have a bit of, I don't know if I want to say advantage, but because of my family history and because of the way I look, I think I was allowed to say certain things and not get as canceled for them because of the way that I looked, which is unfortunate. No one should ever feel that way. But I think that that was a benefit of a lot of the conversations that I was in.
Yeah, perhaps so. And around these themes of what the pandemic was like and navigating the gender issue, I see a greater theme of safety and what's considered unsafe. And like for me, I'm pretty sure like people considered me a safe person before 2020, or even before 2021. But just to have like one's language be considered unsafe is like, okay, that's one level. And then to have someone imply or even just say flat out like your presence is unsafe in their
Mm,
opinion. It I think that that's such a like an issue of trust, and also like there's like a lack of clarity there, like there's a lack of like understanding um just kind of the basics of navigating like two genders, vaccines don't stop the spread, like just like we
mhm,
just need some like framework. So like while it's nice to say lean away from facts and more towards friendships, it's like, but to have friendships, especially during the pandemic, like to physically have friendships and like to be in the same room, you
mhm.
did need to agree on some facts.
No, I agree, and I think that that's why so many people, including myself, lost a lot of friends. And I think I will say I do think it's easier to lean into the friendships friendships when people over facts now, because I think things have kind of calmed down a little bit more since 2020. But I will say that I don't I think I was honestly, some of it is a mystery as to how I maintain certain friendships through that all, because I do have friends who are very, they did feel like being around people who were not vaxxed or who didn't accept certain gender ideologies were violent, and they just could not be around them. But these friends, I would tell them my stances on these things, and we somehow are still friends to this day. Um, and I do think that it was because we had to have a conversation in person. The conversation didn't have happen over text or social media. And I think it's a lot harder to disown someone or to be rude or mean to them in person. I don't know. That could just be my experience, but I do feel like it's a little bit more difficult to outcast someone when they're in front of you.
That's true. I think that's human nature. um Yeah, and that's what makes like we were talking about a personal example earlier of like someone not even wanting to have a conversation in person. It's just like your rhetoric not welcome. Like no examples, no specifics, just like not welcome, or else reported to the authorities. Off you go.
Yeah.
And so like when there are situations like that, then the conversations can't even happen in person because like it potentially actually could be unsafe or just like really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And like not just uncomfortable emotionally, but it's like, I mean, if you're gonna call the cops on me, like I think that this might be better done over video at least.
Yeah. I mean, I have, to be honest, there's friends that since 2020, when they found out some views, they just blocked me and I haven't talked to them since. And that's including a cousin. So, I mean, of course, I want to be able to keep friendships as much as possible, but I'm also aware that the world we live in, that's not possible all the time. And there's going to be times when we do everything in our effort to maintain a friendship, but it goes both ways. And if that person isn't willing to have a dialogue, then I can't force them to be my friend or to stay in my life. So I never want to make it seem like I have kept all my friends. I haven't. There's definitely people that I have not talked to in a few years. But I mean, there also has been people who've came around and who have, maybe we're not friends, but they've messaged me an apology, or if they've realized the toxicity in, I guess, policing speech. And I'm very thankful that they at least recognize that we don't have to be friends, but as long as they support people's right to expression and freedom of expression, then I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think some of these versions of force they come for the individual in order for the individual to wake up. It doesn't always happen for all of us that way. Like some of us care before it really personally affects us. Like for me, I've cared for a while. But I've also had people come back around. I don't know that I've had anyone like specifically say I'm sorry, but I've had people come around and be kind of,
Mm,
it's just obvious that they've changed their way of thinking, at least in one or two areas, and that's good to see. I mean, on this show leaving the left for liberty, I feel like it sounds so political, but the point is that you're leaving a political ideology behind for whatever liberty means for you. And
Mm.
I don't know about you, but like for me, like say like a balance of safety and freedom is necessary and a flourishing friendship. Like, and it's necessary to like, I don't want to talk about it all the time, but like, I think there needs to be some agreement on like, what does safe mean for you and what does free mean for you? And like, what does that mean in the context of a relationship?
I agree. And there was actually someone that I met in Los Angeles when I was still living there, and they consider themselves transgender. And I met them. We ended up following each other on Instagram, and I still have them on Instagram today. And I mean, if anyone looks at my Instagram, they know my stance on gender. But we have had conversations in private. We did a podcast together and we talked about some of those things, and it wasn't an easy conversation. There were points where they told me, you know what, I this is something that I do feel like disrespected in, and something that I a boundary that I do have. But I think that, and I shared with them that as well, my boundaries. But I think that one, that person's very special and unique to even be willing to have a conversation with me. And I do want to acknowledge that. I'm very thankful that they're willing to still be virtual friends despite our disagreements. Um, but I do agree that we there is so many times when we have to lay out our boundaries and what we deem okay, this is okay, these are my limits. Because I definitely had to do that with that person and other people. But I'm thankful we still were able to have a conversation and we still dialogue to this day.
What was that conversation like?
Um, I think we were both nervous at first. But because we had talked in person, and when we did talk in person, we became, I guess, friends, acquaintances before we knew each other. I mean, I knew their stance, obviously, but they didn't know my stance. And so I think that us, I think us having that conversation now, was really good because I am they do believe in a lot of things I don't agree with, but that conversation, we did find a lot of common ground, surprisingly. And so, for example, when we talked about periods, and I was very, I'm adamant that only, and I think that's because I have a terrible experience. I get sick and it's just not fun at all for me. It's really bad. And when I expressed that concern to them, they said, no, I acknowledge that I will never have a period. However, as a transgender person with hormones, I kind of experience something similar. And while I don't agree with them, they at least acknowledge that my experience is very different than theirs. And so, even if we didn't completely agree, I'm thankful that we agreed on half of something. So,
That is a fundamental agreement that you reached. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and you made a or you wrote something on your story the other day about the differences and the varieties of personalities among people who identify as trans and how like there are some like that I don't want to name names. You might want to name names. So I'm going to try really hard not to. But there are some who might be more prone to like mock us as women and make a mockery and a caricature of womanhood. There are some that really don't even know that they are the sex that they are. Like, and there's types that are more aggressive and I mean, they're just people. Like, I mean, they're just men and women, boys and girls, like the rest of us. So they have many, many different personalities. And then there's like the person that you were just talking about, and a couple of others we've seen in a more public light who acknowledge their biological sex. They acknowledge that they don't agree with coerced speech and normalizing preferred pronouns in the way of saying you have to use these to speak about me. And so like within this like range of personality and belief among people who identify as transgender, what do you see that's like different that I maybe haven't already said, but like what do you see that's like different among them, and what do you see that might be the same?
mm, I think that because and I have talked to some of these people in person, and I agree some of them have very harsh personalities and others are a little bit more open-minded. And I think that one thing is, even though some of them say that they acknowledge that they're a biological male or female, they will still, because I have watched some of their videos too, they will still say things like, for example, one person who is more on the right and says that, there's two genders and says a lot of other stuff. In one of their videos, they still say, I guess they're dating a biological male. They say that their biological male boyfriend is not gay, that he's dating a woman, that he's completely heterosexual, and I disagree with that because I think your sexuality has to do with your sexual reproductive organs. I don't think it has to do with anything else. And so that, even though they say they disagree with people who may be considered radical, they still believe the same thing. It's at the core, they still do. Maybe the way that they present the information is different, but I mean, I don't think that you would say that your partner who is of the opposite gender is straight if that was something. When I heard that person say that, that was kind of an indicator to me that they do believe that the gender is a social construct if they are making that claim about their boyfriend, if that makes sense.
Yes, and uh, another example is I think this, I mean, maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, if there's like some trans identified person out there who doesn't fit in this box, but I'm pretty sure the experience of believing that you're trans is that you want to pass as the opposite sex. And I'm not even saying that's right or wrong. I'm just trying to like frame like what it's like, right? So like you're not comfortable in your body. That must be really, really hard. And so for some people, the course of action is to do what's called transitioning and want to appear as the opposite sex. So even if someone isn't all that forceful about it and they're more understanding, ultimately they still do want to create some deception in the world.
Mhm.
And you know, I had a therapist on my show called Tava Johnstone. She's brilliant, and she was considering gender identity theory as a belief system and even kind of like a secular religion.
Mm.
And so, like, I certainly like. I think religion implies like a higher power, but like if we just kind of consider it a religion in the way of like, well, there's rituals, you know, like they have some similar mechanisms at work. It's a secular religion. If it's a belief system at all, I mean, even like political beliefs are not they're not religious, they're not faith-based per se. Then is there a way for us collectively to allow people such as these people who believe in gender identity to continue believing this in a way to practice their secular religion without um, letting them infringe on other people's rights to religious freedom and other individual freedoms that we have?
Yeah, I think that's a question that I've constantly been contemplating, because I used to even hold the belief that if if this person if this person isn't, I am I allowed to say names, or should I?
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
I've just been trying not to for my own self because I'm trying to like only say them when it's like super relevant. So I imagine you want to tell like a little story or anecdote. So please, yeah, share a
Okay.
name. Yeah.
And I used to watch a lot of Blair White's content. I followed Blair, and I would even share some of Blair's content. And something that my mind has changed with that is because if I genuinely don't agree that gender is a social construct, and if I genuinely believe in a lot of the repercussions of a lot of these medical procedures, then why am I endorsing Blair and not other people? Who, when I feel like Dylan is more so making a mockery, I'm thankful that I don't really see Blair doing the same things Dylan does. But at the core, they're still pretending to be someone that they're not. And I do think that these people who are such as Blair, Buck Angel, who are kind of practicing their own secular religion, I do think that consenting adults, I, I, I go back and forth because I I do want to say consenting adults should be able to do whatever they want without the government interfering in their lives. And at the same time, I've seen so many videos of people who are over the age of 18 who were rushed into the transition process and then deeply regret it. And they have their voices change. They don't have a sex drive anymore. And my heart breaks for them because I know the truth, what I believe is true, that you're not born. I do believe that gender dysphoria is a real issue, and I will never understand what it's like to struggle with that. Um, but if I it's like if I see a friend walking into a fire and I know that fire is going to hurt them, am I not going to want to go and stop my friend from walking into that fire? Even though that's not going to impact my life, I still, because they're a human being and I care about them and I care about their humanity, I'm going to want to tell them. And so that's something that I've been wrestling with, even seeing adults kind of rush. And when I say adults, I'm mainly referring to people between every age is impacted by it, but I do see a lot of young people who are above the age of 18 rushed into these procedures and then regretting it. And so if I know the truth, I want to warn them and I want to tell them that you don't have to do this. You don't have to change yourself because society's telling you that you don't fit into these stereotypes. Um, but then I don't necessarily believe that creating laws to force these people not to do that, I don't think that's the answer either. I think that would just create a lot of bitterness and it would just create even more or different problems. But I definitely believe in warning adults about the repercussions, making sure that they are so well informed, because it absolutely breaks my heart when I see anyone, even Jazz. I saw her YouTube videos. She's around my age, or he's around my age, and he transitioned into a girl when he was at the age of 4. And so seeing people go through these things, and then recently he said that he doesn't feel like himself. He doesn't feel like himself in his body, and he just broke down. And that just breaks my heart because of so many people who told him, yes, that's going to be the answer for your depression, for everything you're going through. That just breaks my heart. And so I really care about these people knowing that there are other options. And I really want to, if I see someone, tell them the truth in love, and warn them, because I do think that there's a lot of repercussions and things that they can't go back on once they make that permanent decision.
I appreciate that you put words to the difference between a desire to warn them and to enforce government policies on them. Because I find that there's an assumption that if you're doing the warning, that you are championing every single bill
Mm-hmm.
that's being passed. Now, as I understand, the bills that are being passed are about children having this
Yes.
done. So there's that. Also, as I understand, someone can correct me, or if maybe you know differently, but I'm pretty sure that the brain does not fully mature until at least 25, if not 28.
So there's a lot of back and forth between that, but most people do believe that it is about 25, 28. It's different for guys and girls, but even I think it's even a little bit later for guys, which is even more concerning. So,
That is concerning.
yeah.
Not surprising. Sorry. We're all different. It's okay. Um, yeah. Yeah. And like to come back to the theme of relationships, um, when a pair of people or two groups of people have such polar opposite understandings of what it means to be human. And I do think that there's more to being human than just your sex. Like there's way more to it than that, but that's part of it.
Mhm.
And then I do find that within this belief system of gender identity theory that there's there's a desire for retribution, for revenge. It's almost like a corrosive um behavior. And I'm not referring to the people in per se. I'm actually talking about the ideology itself. It's just the way it works.
Mhm.
It all I really see is like a seeking to play God and to seek revenge, or at the very least silence anyone who opposes what they want to do. And that's why I wonder if there is a way, to like, kind of be like separate but together.
Mm.
And then I wonder, like, in the more microcosm sense of relationships, like, what do you think? Like, you're growing up in Gen Z, you're having these really brave friendships and doing the best that you can to continue connecting with people across the aisle. Like, how could we possibly navigate this one-on-one or family to family when we have like this godlike mechanism in place, and also like this drive to
Mm.
silence and to seek revenge?
Mm. I think that when it comes to one-on-one relationships, so on the microscopic level, because it's different on the macro, but on the microscopic level, I do think that it's so important for us to use language, and I'm not saying for us to censor ourselves because I don't believe in us censoring our speech at all. But I do think that in being selective with the way that we approach these conversations with our words, because people can get defensive, and once they get defensive, they're not going to listen. So I feel like when we have conversations with family members, with friends, for example, one of my very good friends from college is believes very different than me. And so I try to be, for example, I if I'm talking about the gender issue, I'm not going to um I'm not going to be extremely blunt when I start the conversation. I'm going to try to use words that I'll try to speak from personal experience, or I'll try to speak from situations that have happened, like, oh, this was the outcome of this law. It breaks my heart that these people were impacted, opposed from saying there's two genders, which it shouldn't be controversial to say that, but I probably won't lead with that. I'll lead with the outcomes and how people were affected. That way they see the humanity in the situation. And then we can be a little bit more specific as that conversation continues. But that's kind of been my approach when approaching family and friends, because I've seen people get defensive. I myself used to get defensive in certain conversations when it came to race. And I would just shut off someone when they said certain words. And I think that a lot of people my age do the same thing. When they hear a trigger word, they kind of just shut people off and they don't listen to anything they have to say after that. So I think it's really important that we are selective with our words. And I really love someone, her name's Christina Buttons. She's a journalist. And I really like a lot of the way she approaches the conversation. I think her and her boyfriend do a really good job at that.
Hmm. And when you were talking about like choosing your words somewhat carefully, and I like what you said about like starting with the outcome and how it's affecting people, and that brings in the humanity of the issue, how it's affecting people. That that resonates with me. And also reflecting on like what you told me really early on in our conversation today about like you being doxxed, and you thinking like, oh, maybe you should have chosen your words more carefully, and like now you do. But the nature of doxing is that there's no grace. There's no like, oh, she's just a human being, and maybe she didn't pick every word the way that she wishes she could. Like, but it's almost like if the belief system is that people are gods, that you make idols of people, then they kind of do the same to you actually in the doxing process, where
Mm.
they like they hold you to like such a high I guess you could say high or just impossible standard of wanting you to speak in a very particular way. And so I feel like there's a balance here because, yeah, like, I mean, I know for me, like, usually I pick my words very carefully, but sometimes I don't. And I don't really regret that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know, I don't really know what to do with that sometimes, especially on like some of these really divisive issues, because like when it affects like when it sometimes like they'll directly affect an issue will directly affect a relationship. It's like just really relevant. It's there. And if two people can't agree to offer each other grace, do you think that there's still a way to bring grace into the relationship?
Honestly, I think that I mean, we can only control the things that we say and how we respond to a conversation. I think that these people, some people who do have this very intense belief that, you know, what they say is right, and if you say the incorrect thing, and in a sense, you're kind of like sinning against their belief system. I genuinely believe that sometimes I, for example, the people who doxed me and who did hold that very strong belief, there was nothing I could say that was going to change their mind. I could respond to their questions, but I knew that really once they were already in this mindset, there was, they had something. I really do believe that they had to come to that conclusion on their own. I do think that there's ways we can help them by asking questions, kind of poking holes in their belief system that will get their wheels spinning. But I mean, I do believe that with some people, there's nothing that we can do to. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I do. I mean, we're humans, and I do believe that some people, they have to come to that conclusion on their own. We're not going to be able to win everyone over, and that's the unfortunate reality. Is I can only control what I'm going to say. Can try to word it to the best of my ability, but like you said, I can say it in the nicest way, and they can still get extremely angry and still dox people. Um, I don't know if that answers the question, but I do think that there's just situations where we're not going to be able to win over everyone.
Yeah, it does. I'm still forming the question and my answer as well, because this is like an ongoing saga. And being American in the 2020s is like how I think like the more pointed question I've been asking myself is like, when do you know, or how do you know when it's time to just let go and just say, you
Mm,
know what, like this dialogue, or maybe it's not even a dialogue, but like whatever this like a relationship is, like it's just not serving either of us. Of course, you can't really know what the other person is feeling and thinking unless they're pouring their heart out to you. But like, I think there are times where um like you can only do so much to be the bigger person.
mhm.
And being the bigger person, you have that opportunity to do that when you're faced with conflict, like whether it's any of these issues or whatever other conflict might arise in a relationship. You have that opportunity, and it's a good opportunity. But I guess the question I ask myself is like, how many more times do I want to do that?
Yeah. And I think that honestly, when it comes to, I think there's a difference between friendships and acquaintances. I mean, the person who is transgender, who I really disagree with, I don't think I would necessarily consider them a friend that I would share my heart with and constantly be in contact with. I consider them an acquaintance that I can have a conversation with. And I think that that's something as human beings, we form those boundaries of, I have a very small circle of people that I will, that I do consider friends who I believe I'm investing time and energy in, because I don't want to surround myself with people that are going to make me a more bitter or sad person. I definitely want to surround myself with edifying people. So I think really distinguishing that, how that looks in our own lives of, these people are acquaintances. I'm going to love them from a distance, engage when I want to. We don't have to respond to them all the time. We don't have to answer their messages all the time. We have boundaries. And then these are the people that I do consider my friends, and that they bring life into into my life and joy. I think that's been very helpful for me, is distinguishing between acquaintances and friends, and who, kind of allocating my time accordingly.
Mm. I've also been reflecting on tiers, tiers of friendship, tiers of
Mm,
relationship, and um, getting more clear on like, what is this relationship about, and like kind of where is it on the map of my life. And meanwhile, like we also see so much division, and division basically implies two sides. So it's like it's either here or here. And that's not necessarily always the case for every individual. Not every individual is just like, either you're in or you're out with friendships. At the same time, I do wonder what someone could be capable of if they can be deluded to the point of not remembering that there are two genders. I feel like I talk about it way too much, but I'm not even talking about gender per se. What I'm talking about is like when there's so much delusion and deception to that extent, and even to the extent of like during the pandemic and even now at times, like, just dehumanizing others or even dehumanizing the self, where it's like, how much are you gonna like, is like, you see people just saying the most just like the most bizarre things, and at times like the most like hurtful things, and at times acting on that behavior. And for me, like, while I can learn to love people from a distance, there are times, and I would say, like, I have doubts about anyone who believes in gender identity theory, not because of like, I don't know, it's not the belief itself that quite bothers me. It's the deception around it. It's the desire for retribution and revenge. It's like all of it kind of packaged together that makes me wonder if this person can be so lost and they can forget this fundamental fact about one part of what it means to be human. What else are they capable of? How else could they be controlled? And should I feel safe around them?
Mhm. I think that so many people, I guess I can only speak for Gen Z in this case, um, but I do think that a lot of the any of the critical theories under that umbrella, whether it be gender, race, a lot of these that do require retribution. A lot of the people who like people like Abram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, that's all we've been taught. So in college, in my philosophy class, I used to hold the belief that gender was a social construct. Despite being grown in a Christian household, despite being a science major, I did hold the belief that gender was a social construct, not for long, but for a little bit, because it was convincing. It was a convincing argument. I believe that my professor was the expert on that topic, and that professor is brilliant. I do like that professor, but I disagree with him now on that claim, very much so. But I believed them because that was all I had ever been. I guess in college, that was the first conversation about that topic. And so, as a first generation college student, it was so easy for me just to take what the professors were saying at face value. And I think that a lot of people my age who are taught these concepts in high school and in college, um, that's all they've been taught. And I think that when we ask them questions, their belief system, even though a lot of people come off harshly and like they will be violent, almost if you disagree with them, I think that when we poke holes in their argument or in their belief system, a lot of them will come around only because that's the only thing they've ever been taught. They've never been taught any other viewpoints, if that makes sense. And I know it doesn't apply to every generation, but I see that as a very common theme with Gen Z. And they value authenticity. And I really do think that they do. I think that they value people um who are willing to be honest with them, and share personal experiences, because I've seen a lot of minds changed when I have shared a personal experience with them. I've seen their minds change. And I don't know if I'm being too optimistic, but I think that when we do poke holes, that most of them are willing to come around, because again, it's as if they were only told one thing their whole life, and then someone presents new information and they're kind of just stunned at that new piece of information. So again, I know this like really is applicable to younger generations, but I do see that. I see it as a common theme, and I'm hopeful because I see that.
Yeah. And people are made of stories. Like, it's a very human thing to gravitate towards storytelling, and the whole like lived experience, lived experience uh term. I think I kind of in a way gravitate toward it, but I also like linguistically I'm like, but an experience is inherently lived. You don't need to call it lived.
Mm.
But that aside, like when I was listening to you speak about sharing your personal stories, a quote from Carl Jung came to mind. He said that
Mm,
the evil in the world exists because people are not able to tell their stories.
mm,
And what I noticed, particularly in 2020, was this. It almost felt like cutting off a limb, like of if like you consider humanity like a body, actually. It felt like cutting off a limb. Like, well, this limb is not welcome, i.e., these stories are not welcome. And I found that to be very dehumanizing, actually.
mm,
Like and counterproductive. Like I don't think it was helpful for anyone because how can we solve anything? How can we connect in any meaningful way or at all if not everyone is welcome to tell their stories?
mm. I agree. It's so important that we're able to share our stories. This might be an extreme example, but it's one that when you were sharing that quote that I thought of, when someone grows up in a secluded environment, or whether it be a cult or religious cult or whatever it is, they never hear any other story. And so when they do hear a new perspective, um, I they want to find out if it's true or not. And I think that that's the power in us sharing our stories with people. And I think that it sparks interest. And I think that in that they go down a rabbit hole most of the time. And and maybe they don't change all of their beliefs, but I think that they're challenged. And I think that's a step in the right direction.
It sparks curiosity. Yeah. And I was also reflecting on your suggestion of asking questions, a way of poking holes. Like one version of that is the Socratic method. And I think it's really effective, but I have been hesitant to do it because I feel like it's disingenuous because I
Mm,
know what I'm doing. And they might
mm,
even know, but if they don't, I almost feel worse because I'm like, this just seems like a game. And I feel like
mm.
I don't know, I just feel kind of icky doing it.
Yeah. I think I've always been a very curious person. So when I have asked my friends questions, I mean, I do know it's effective, but also I am genuinely curious to hear their response. And I think that that's important to keep in mind when we have conversations with people, that we are genuinely listening to what they're saying. And of course, it's awesome if that does work to change their mind, but it's also beneficial to me to hear their thought process behind why they believe what they believe, because I think it makes me a better thinker, and it also helps me talk to more people more effectively.
Yeah, it helps you hone your communication skills, and it's a good exercise in discovering someone else's backstory, like kind of like a fictional character. Like, how did they get to this point?
Yeah,
It's really
yeah.
curious. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see what else. I've got a few more like sort of like higher level, like energetic spiritual things I wanted to ask you. What are some standards for yourself that liberate your spirit?
Mm. Could you specify a little bit more of that
Yeah,
question?
I kind of just wanted to put it out there to see if it sparked anything, but here's where I'm coming from with that question. So I tend to be pretty freedom minded. I do and I think many of us over wherever we are are like we do everything we can to like consider um, each person's freedom, individual rights, liberties, and all that. At the same time, I also have witnessed and experienced myself liberation within a container of sorts.
Mm,
Like, I mean, if you consider like your own home, like you create an environment, and at times you might set standards for yourself for rituals or habits, you have, and like a little more philosophically, like you have values, right? Like you have things
mm,
that are important to you, things that you believe. So I'm envisioning like a container, right? Where you feel perhaps liberated and still you're setting standards for yourself.
mm. I think that when I think as you're asking that question, I think of, so for me, I'm a Christian. I'm a Reformed Christian, and I think that the whole Christian faith um, kind of embodies that question of there are things that I don't do, or there's boundaries in a container of things that I don't do. And I think a lot of that is when it, in terms of engaging with culture, the old Noelle, I guess, to speak, would be a lot more, I guess, in the way that I would speak to people would be a lot more self-serving, more condescending. But within what I do believe, I believe in the Bible and Jesus and what he taught. And I do believe that there's a way that I approach my speech. So I guess that's a form of a containment is I'm naturally more sassy and sarcastic. And that still comes out. It's still very much so part of my personality. But I guess there's a I guess a limit, or because I know that I'm not representing myself anymore. I know that my faith is at the forefront of everything I do. I'm very open about my faith, and I know that I'm representing um, Jesus and God, and who's a lot bigger than just me and myself. So I think that's at the forefront of my mind of that kind of contains a lot of the things that I do. But I find so much liberation in that because um, for one, I do hold the belief that Jesus died on the cross for my sins. And so I'm not enslaved to anything that I was in my past life. So when I speak of my past life, before I was saved, before I had my beliefs. So I've always struggled with periods of, I guess, deep sorrow or sadness. And a lot of my solution to that was, I guess, ways of self gratification that I found no hope in. And when I was saved, when I did find my hope in Jesus and I was saved by the gospel, that completely shifted. I had no longer found freedom in anything that I found freedom in before. There was so much freedom in knowing that I couldn't earn a gift of grace. And so I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does, um but when I found freedom in Jesus and Christ and through the gospel that he died on the cross for me and rose again, there my soul was freed in knowing that I couldn't earn grace, and my heart was changed to I want to do everything to glorify God. And of course there's so many things I mess up in and so many areas I fail in, but that container stems from a complete heart change of wanting to glorify God and represent him well.
Hmm. There's a lesson there on serving something that's greater than yourself, even if it means serving a value or a virtue, something that's just greater than your day to day. And at the same time, I'm curious how you're finding like a balance um, while you're holding these like very, big topics. And I think a big mission that you feel called to commit to, like you're holding all this. And also, like how or when, like, do you know, like just take a step back from certain things and maybe lean into other things and just like overall find a balance for living your life?
I think that's something that I've recently been rediscovering of what that looks like, what conversations to engage in, because I'm sure, it can be exhausting engaging in a lot of these cultural conversations. Um, and I think I've just really tried to be more intentional with what I do talk about and how that I try to talk about things that I feel one deeply connect to my faith, and two that um impact people in a very long-term way. For example, that's why I think I've been talking so much about the gender discussion, because of all the repercussions that it has on whether it be other people who are impacted by the laws that are created, or the people who are struggling with their gender identity. And so I guess being selective with which things to talk about, and also giving myself the space to take a step back and know that I don't have to comment on everything. And I can just take time to learn from people who are so much wiser than me, and not feel like I have to respond to everything. I think sometimes we can feel, at least I can speak for myself, this need to respond to everything that's going on in the news. And I don't think that we give anything back by being super responsive. I think we offer a lot back when we take time to reflect on things, gather our thoughts, and then share what we think about that after we've kind of composed our thoughts.
I agree. Actually, I've been setting the intention when inviting guests on to build a little bit of a relationship with them. Like we've, exchanged messages for a while now. And before I take on a new topic, I like to really think about it. And sometimes like it feels like I'm almost late, but it
Mm,
never really feels late. Like even
mhm.
talking about like your early experience of being doxxed, like, but you've learned so much from it. So like speaking about it in hindsight, like there's so much wisdom there and you've had time to reflect and learn from others. And I think it's all about timing, but the timing is different for each individual, and we each just need to learn to take the call, I guess.
I agree.
Yeah. So what's an intention that you're setting for yourself moving forward?
I think I think lately has just been, and I know I've brought my faith a lot, but it's just a huge part of who I am. Um an intention has been to 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 know why I'm saying what I'm saying before I say it. And with that I mean knowing that the goal of making a video or writing something about what's going on is not to make myself known, is not to make my own opinion known, but it's truly out of the desire to help people and to glorify God. Um and that's been a really big thought at the, I guess that's been a really big intention of mine, before posting anything, especially lately, because I think it's gotten a little more chaotic in some ways recently. So I hope that makes sense. I don't know if it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've had a lot to say recently, and I've felt really drawn to you for that reason. But also I do take notice in the space between, and I really respect you for it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram, Noelle.Fitchett. It's spelled pretty how it's heard, but Fitchett. It's kind of complicated. And on Twitter, same thing, Noelle Fitchett. I'm the only Noelle Fitchett really on the internet, so it should be pretty easy to find me.
Okay, good. Well, any parting thoughts for this first conversation we'll have among many others, I hope.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Sienna. I really do value your content as well. The things you have to say. I love following people like you, people like Christina and Colin. I love learning from multiple perspectives and people who are open-minded and who are willing to hear different perspectives. And I do see that so much in you and the conversations we've had. So thank you. It's an honor to come on your podcast, and I'm just very thankful. So
That's so kind of you to say. Thank you, Noelle. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.